Good morning. Do you know what it is? Hump day! Mike. So last week on Holocaust Remembrance Day, I forgot to post my picture of Morris Price. And then last night, both my wife and I got home later, and we've been watching Band of Brothers. I'd never seen it, and it's a series that she loves, so we flipped that on, and it was the second to last episode, and it was the episode where they discovered the camps in Germany when Easy Company came across their first camp. So obviously, it's time for me to do the story that I have regarding the Holocaust, because I can't get enough signs to tell me to do that. So on my bucket list, I wanted to meet a Holocaust survivor. And about 8 years ago, I went to the Museum of Tolerance in LA, which if you've never been to, I know there's more than one. There's one in Washington, and certainly there's one in Germany. But the Museum of Tolerance in LA is great because it isn't just about the Holocaust. It's actually three museums in one. There's a museum on Anne Frank. There's a museum about the Holocaust, and then there's a museum about intolerance generally in the United States towards African Americans, towards homosexuals, whatever. But on that day, I got to meet a guy by the name of Morris Price, who is a Holocaust survivor, and I'll put up his photo and the little bio on him. So Morris was a Jew in Poland when the Germans stormed Poland and occupied Poland. And when they came into Warsaw, they immediately went to houses that had Jews and scooped them all up and started sending them off to these camps. Morris was at a friend's house at the time when that happened, and he was 11 years old, 11, 12. So his whole family was taken away. He then was booted out of the house that he was in and was scooped up along with his two sisters, and they were put in a labor camp outside of Warsaw. His sisters were very good cooks, and so they immediately became cooks in the labor camp. He escaped out of the labor camp and was in the ghetto in Warsaw, which if you ever saw Spielberg's movies, you saw how they cleaned out the ghettos in Warsaw. He was part of that and ended up in Auschwitz. He was in Auschwitz for several years, for the majority of the war, and he ended up with a German soldier who he said clearly wasn't interested in being there and wasn't interested in what the Germans were doing. So while he was, in a horrible situation where people were being killed everywhere and he wasn't getting any food or medical treatment or anything like that, the immediate soldier that he worked for told him, do your work and stay here and you shouldn't be bothered. So that's what he did. He did his work and he stayed in one corner of the camp. And he said, for the most part, he goes, I really wasn't bothered. He goes, but obviously he was emaciated. Towards the end of the war, he was then scooped up and he went to Dachau. Now, Dachau wasn't a camp. Dachau was simply an extermination facility. He ended up somehow not being immediately killed when he went to Dachau. He was on a train. Everybody that was in his car was killed, but as he was walking on his way where they had taken his clothes and done the whole thing, he was grabbed by a German soldier because they needed somebody to carry something, so they had him do that. And the next thing he knew, he was actually in a cell in one of the outposts that they had and didn't get exterminated, even though everybody that he was with got exterminated. He was in this cell and was kind of an assistant and figured, every day that he thought he was going to die. And it wasn't much long after that the Allied forces made it into Berlin, and all of the guards at the camps just left. Now, before they did that, they shot as many people as they could with the bullets that they had. They set places on fire. Somehow Morris survived all of that, and he woke up to a camp that had no guards. So now they all walked out of the camp. They walked out of Dachau. But as they did that, they had to try to find Allied forces, because if they ran into the SS stayed loyal to Hitler to the end, and they would kill them. So they ended up hiding in a church. So he hid in the church for a day, and then everybody else that he was with decided to go out and look for Allied forces. He decided to stay. All of those people that went out and looked for Allied forces ran into SS and were in fact killed. He stayed in the rafters of this church for 3 days until he heard soldiers down in the church. He said he could barely move. He was so weak. So he said, I figured, we'll see if I get rescued or not. And he went down, and it was American forces, and he was liberated. His sisters did, in fact, survive in the labor camp, and he was reunited with them. He was also reunited with a brother, but the brother did not make it as he tried to, come back to life, eating, trying to get his body to restart. His brother only lived a couple of weeks, and then he died. So he and his sister, he was now around 17. He and his sister immigrated to the United States via the Catholic Church to the Jewish Center, meaning the Catholic Church was who was housing people at the time. And then the Jewish community immigrated people back into the U.S., and he came in through New Orleans and then went to work for a Jewish man who was a watchmaker, who gave him a job. He learned how to fix watches and then learned English and graduated from high school, and then eventually was actually drafted and sent back to Germany as part of the Marshall Plan. And as he says, only now he wore an American flag and he had the gun as opposed to the Germans having the gun. He ended up landing in Los Angeles. He got married. He had 4 children. 3 children became doctors, and 1 child had disabilities. That child lived with him for the child's entire life, and that child passed away when he was 27, which the doctors learned a lot about what happens with stress on genes because of the people that survived the Holocaust. It gets passed on, and so a lot of times people who did survive the Holocaust, their children would have a higher rate of disabilities because of the stresses that they went through. But to stand there, and he had the tattoos on his arm, he had the whole bit, and to stand there and listen to this guy talk about his experience was hard to wrap your brain around and extraordinary. So whatever problems we think we got going on, seriously listen to somebody who's been through something like that. But if you read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, he went through the Holocaust, and he talks about how the people that survived had a reason to survive, and Morris had a reason to survive. He knew his sisters were going to make it, and he said, I knew I had to take care of my sisters because I knew the rest of my family was gone, and that was his reason for, I have to do this. So reasons come first, answers come second. Don't get involved in the tyranny of how. Well, he had his reason, and the other people that survived, most of them had a reason as to why they survived. So I'll post Morris's picture and his quick little bio that they have. He was an extraordinarily beautiful man. I have no idea if Morris is still alive or not. I certainly hope that he is. It was a while ago that I met him, and obviously the World War II people are getting up there in age. A lot of time has passed, but an unbelievable event that happened during that war, and it shows just how far things can go when you have a tyrannic leader, and how much people are willing to look the other way and not get involved when horrific things are happening. But it also can show you the strength of the human spirit and how people were able to survive that. And he was not an angry person. He was not a person that looked back and said, he did not have hatred towards that experience. He had made a decision that he was going to, number one, not let anybody forget that experience, but number two, that he was going to look at it as how lucky he was that he was able to survive, and how he had to pass on that knowledge, but live every day in honor of those that didn't survive. And he was just a beautiful man, and I'm incredibly lucky I got to spend time with him. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you very much for watching. I'll post that stuff after we get this video up. Thanks. We're all in this together. Let's take care of each other.